All right, I do want to maybe look at the Jack video, though. Okay, what could his take be here? How Blizzard can stop future Mythic Plus God comps.
Hey, what's going on, guys? Well, it's still early in Season 3, and balance feels pretty good. There is always the concern of the exotic...
Does balance actually feel good right now? I actually feel like balance is in a... So, it's not what balance was like at the beginning of 10.1. 10.1 was insane. I think that was... I mean... I've heard people say, and I think it's the most balanced that Mythic Plus has ever been. There was like 3 good tanks. Every healer was good. And like there was just a million DPS you could have played with, and then 10.1.5 happened. What are like what's the meta thing? Oh, this Banshee guy keeps tweeting it. Oh, here we go. Cool. They're a Swifty. Very cool. Here it is. After 6 weeks of the season, here's the recap. Tanks, very small changes. It looks like the top tank players are swapping between Vengeance and Prop Pally depending on the dungeon. Healers, I guess that makes sense. Healers, third straight week of new #1 for healers is Resto Druid Sneaks by Mistweavers. DPS mages had the largest jump, not surprising. Add a scuffed FAQ slide, sure. So this is healers and tanks. This is interesting. In the grand scheme of things, I still think this is actually a good season for tanks. I think Vengeance just has like way too much control in dungeons, and Prop Pally has like way too much utility. But like even in a season where you can forget 4 of the tanks and just 2 of them basically share the top spot, that's better than most seasons, because most seasons it's like 80% one tank. But I would just say Dragonflight in general has not looked like that, except for Bear at the end of last season, but not the beginning. But the thing is a lot of these classes can do very, very high keys. Like these classes aren't bad, which is good. Healers I know a lot less about. Preservation Evoker, I don't think this is true to their power. I think it's just simply for a healer spot and a key. Aug is brought so much right now, but we'll get into how I think that's going to change soon. But Aug is brought so much right now that bringing 2 evokers isn't... I mean, evokers actually have a lot of utility. Like, bringing a second evoker is... If you're going to bring a second of any class to any dungeon just purely based on, like, value, not, like, healing damage, stuff like that, like, just the utility, the value you bring... I mean, evokers, bringing another evoker brings you a ton, right? You get, like, a second Zephyr, you get a second, like, Cauterize, you get a second Rescue Shield... I mean, it's definitely like a lot of group benefit, a lot of stops, you know, a lot of group benefit. It makes sense that it's like this. Like, I just don't think this means they're bad. Like, this isn't a scale of how good all of these things are. It is like, Evoker's way better than that. It's just a comp thing. Shaman doesn't really bring anything to your group. Paladin does, but Prop Paladin exists. But like, I think if you have a healer season, like, I know perfect world is you can bring every single healer to every key. But I think objectively, a healer season where the breakdown is almost roughly thirds between the top 3 best, that is a good good balance. Like if you're someone who's maybe one of these classes, you're like, no, it sucks. But like really, like if you don't care about if you're not biased in any way, like you would hope for that in any given season. That is good. That is historically good healer balance. Okay, and then DPS. I mean, DPS now is better than you think. So Havoc is still like insane. It's been nerfed like 3 times. Rogue is like honestly just as good as Havoc in my opinion for doing a lot of these keys. I think Mage is just as good. I think Warlock is probably just as good as Havoc, honestly. Like Warlock fucking owns. And Evoker, we've already talked about Evoker a lot. I said this at the beginning of the season. Evoker is a nice, clean, like 7 to 12% DPS loss over not running an Evoker right now if you're looking at just pure throughput, which is a big fucking number. So, but you guys know the deal. They bring you a lot of consistency, a lot of safety in keys. And a lot of the times right now, very simply, when you're looking to time a key, you know that if you just live all the way through it, you will time it. At the very, very top keys, that's going to eventually not become the case. You are eventually fighting the timer. When that becomes the case, I think you're going to see more and more groups actually look to drop Evoker, especially during certain affixes. Like, it's really hard to drop them with, like, current affixes. And, like they're just, for some reason, there's only one class in the game with an AoE Soothe, and then also they're great for Afflicted. But I think, like, on non-affix specific weeks, I think you will see more and more top teams drop Evoker, and then that will happen down the ladder as well. So this isn't a good example this week because Raging exists, like I told you. But last week, there wasn't any really AUG-specific affixes, and I just pugged most of my keys. I was doing, like, I don't know what I was doing on Tyrannical last week, like, you know, mostly, like, I don't know, 27s, 26s, almost all in the group finder, though. These are just pug keys. And a lot of groups didn't bring AUG. Sometimes they did, but it seemed like the group leaders in the pug 26 to 27 range were very easily willing to just drop the Evoker if they could get a Lust some other way. And I think that's pretty significant because that's not how it was last season. That's not how it was at the beginning of this season. But it shows that even in the pug levels, people are willing to try other things, which is usually not the case with AUG. So And that could be a couple reasons. Number one, Augs are just like number one key griefers right now. They are griefing keys hard. I think relatively this is decent balance. Like 10.1 was probably the best it's ever been. Season 4 of Shadowlands had really, really good balance. It was like, you know, you could play Rogue, Fire Mage, Windwalker, Survival Hunter, Warlock. I think I might have already said Warlock. And there was one more. Like there was 6 classes that were really good. Right now you have like 4. Hunters are great too, a little squishier near the top level. But like, I think you're going to see this evoker thing drop, and I think you'll see a lot more of these 4 in particular, but I think there's a lot of classes that are really, really good. So decent balance anyways. By the way, that is top tier Asmongold level, making a 40-minute video out of like a 30-second clip. I just did like a fucking 10-minute rant 7 seconds into this fucking video, and he just said, right now balance is good. Let's go. I'm on the top of my game right now.
And one of the biggest reasons I think for an Exodia comp to ever be existing in a Mythic Plus environment is when there's too much friction in being able to form your...
Okay, let's stop again, and this isn't even for like meme reasons. How many times in WoW has there been an Exodia comp? And what I mean by that is like, okay, so like last season was an example, like the specific comp, not most parts of it, not always one tank, always one healer. I mean 5 classes that like all synergize with each other insanely well, all have insanely good buffs. Like, has that ever happened before? Because like, I don't think it has. It's happened like 3 times. Season 3 Shadowlands was Blood Decay. I don't remember the healer. And you ran Destrolock and Survival Hunter, and you could run either like 2 Destrolocks and a Survival Hunter. You could run you could run Windwalker, Survival Hunter, Destrolock. I don't think Season 3 and Season 4 is right. I think you guys are overusing you're stretching to just make it work. That's not actually true, because you played other DPS and you swapped around that comp a lot. It's not like last season you would swap around and bring, you know, 2 Shadow Priests and an Aug or something. Like, no, you brought the exact comp, right? I don't know if that's ever happened, even in triple Rogue seasons, even in triple Windwalker MDI. So like there was never actually something like last season. Last season was very unique, I think. Yeah, almost all those things were 4 out of 5. Yeah, not 5 out of 5. Anyways, back to the video.
From the very beginning. Dungeons, notably, are going to have various dispel profiles, whether there's poisons, diseases, curses, and sometimes they're weighted more heavily or less heavily, depending on the dungeons you're in. Notably, for example, you're going to have some dungeons back in the day like Halls of Atonement, where you really needed a curse dispel. But then you might go into Waycrest Manor, and it's nice to have, but not mandatory to have. Whereas having disease dispel in that dungeon...
Right now, bro, there's nothing you could argue as an Exodia comp right now. There's actually so much good stuff you can play right now in dungeons.
Would be mandatory to have, because it makes a really big difference both on
right now is like the opposite of that
fight, but also on a lot of the trash mobs that are casting dispellable diseases onto players. And so that's a huge difference. You also have to deal with battle res, bloodlust, and a number of buffs which increase survivability and increase damage to a large margin, where you might have like caster comps or melee comps that are all built specifically to engineer the maximum damage or survivability altogether. I think that when balance for the DPS specs or tank specs is usually really strong, all of the healers are balanced pretty well to...
Dude, oh, that's actually a really good point. That like the DPS balance kind of does determine the healer balance. Like if you have a bunch of good classes, you can bring a bunch of different healers. Like last patch, because tank and DPS comp was so locked in, you didn't really have a choice at healer. Right, you didn't really want to bring a Resto Druid because you always had a Guardian Druid. Like, that stuff matters. The reason you don't play a Preservation Evoker in the last 2 seasons is really because you're already playing an Aug and you're doubling up. It's the same thing for Resto and Guardian or Resto and Moonkin. Like, there being a bunch of different options increases the viability because you can actually get into keys. Like, if you're a Resto Druid getting into keys, it's a lot easier when like there isn't a Guardian Druid in every group. That's just a fact, right? So like, and it doesn't mean to be that Guardian is bad. It's just like only if something else is good too. So because there's multiple tanks and healers right now, it actually enables both those things to be more diverse.
Heal through the damage. And I will say
double DH is viable now though. Yeah, it's viable. Yeah, I mean it's good. I don't know if it's like super abyss though. Like you could in any comp right now, if you're running a Vengeance DH and you decided to run no Havoc, but you played Aug Mage Rogue, I think that would be perfectly fine. Like, I don't think you're like losing out by having that. I think Havoc is awesome, but like you'd be able to time any key that a key with double Havoc would be able to do. If you didn't have a Vengeance DH and you played a Paladin and you just, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's good, but it's not like required or abyss.
They've actually done a pretty active job about balancing healers' output, even damage output in a dungeon environment, much more so they've done in other expansions. The problem is that healers can often be chosen to fill in the gaps for all of these groups.
Correct, yeah.
Because there is so much
Except monks. Monks aren't really filling in any gap. Monks actually have a lot of good utility, but do people really think of them when they join keys? Like with a druid, you're like, oh, you get Mark of the Wild. But like monks bring pretty close to Mark of the Wild with 8% increased healing, 4% avoidance, and fizz damage. Like, if you combine everything, it's like pretty close, the total amount of all of those things. But I don't think people really think about that. They're more just like monks can heal through anything.
Friction in these dungeons and how you are able to build a working composition. Of course, you can make
4% avoidance is nuts.
Anything that makes
the only thing that's cringe about monk is that your class tree is unbelievably cringe to get all of those things.
Path of least resistance that much smoother is of course going to be taken by these players. And so that's where it really comes down to where healers are imbalanced, or this healer dominates others, or other tanks are dominating others, when the utility of one of those roles is so powerful, and they also are bringing the damage, the healing, whatever out.
Yeah, like Resto Druid is good right now, but the best thing that Resto Druid has going for it is that Feral, Moonkin, and Guardian are all not considered meta DPS or tanks. That's true. Like Resto Druid being the best of all of the orange classes is the best thing you could hope for because Mark of the Wild is great. That is probably the biggest reason for their I mean, Resto Druids are also good. They do really sick damage in cat form. They're really good healers in dungeons, right? But like the most important thing is that all of those things are not in the comp.
On top of it, in Dragonflight Season 1, we had a really good mix of strong damage dealers, tanks, and healers on hand.
This Season 1,
you were able to mix and match your compositions a lot. You might have, let's say, all of the monk specs being in a good position, but you wouldn't put 3 of the monks in the same group. You wouldn't put Brew, Mistweaver, Windwalker all in the same group because you'd miss out on a lot of your buffs. Instead, you would be able to have a monk and a paladin, or a monk and a demon hunter, and you would be able to merge the groups together by bringing in a really big mix of different classes.
Actually, I bet Moonkin is really good right now. Are people bringing Moonkins to, let's see. I mean, you could definitely play Moonkin. I just wonder where it caps out or becomes like a little bit less value. Let's see. Time to run leaderboards. There we go. We got the Chinese teams playing a Moonkin. It is only them, right? Is there any Western teams playing a Moonkin? Oh, this team's good. The Kira Hearthjacks. I remember them from the MDI last time. Or TGP, sorry. Looks like they only in certain keys, maybe. It looks like certain weeks they played with like a slightly different comp. I mean, yeah, I mean they're up here. They're definitely doing good. Moonkin's only issue is like they do really bad on burst small pulls, but that's like not a high key problem. And they do really bad at surviving. Like Moonkins are just like the squishiest class in the game. But the thing is, if you look at the comps they're playing with unkillable classes, right? So if you need someone to give your external to or give your evoker shield to, with current healer and DPS balance, you can kind of carry one squishy person. Like I remember doing pugs, and like sometimes I, as a demon hunter who will never need this, is getting like rescue shielded by evokers before AoE. And it's because like the only other person in the group is like a warlock and they don't need it as much or something. So like if you did have a squishier DPS, you could enable one person for sure with how much external stuff's in the game right now. Especially with a prop paladin.
Have the same specs altogether. This is nice and it's cool to
yeah, mages and warlocks and demon hunters are all built like absolute trucks.
Seeing all the different colors together, you got to keep in mind there's a lot of different classes on a lot of different specs in the game at this point. And so always having a different class and always trying to play with different classes also really forces people down the path, avoiding other people who play their same class, because you need to have a massively wide range of different buffs and debuffs to apply to enemies and shutdowns and on it goes. That's where we got into the situation of like Season 2, where Augmentation Evoker was obviously too strong. It was basically a support spec, even though they said it wasn't a support spec. It was also bringing the Bloodlust.
Yeah, that was so stupid. Like, it's just a DPS spec. Like, no, it was never them ever saying that it was just another DPS spec is so false. It was so clearly support.
Dispel. It was bringing extra survivability, way too much damage, and buffing the healers and the tanks alt. And so you had this one spec that brings things that nobody else is able to bring, and then you start forming a composition around those benefits, and who receives the greatest amount of those benefits to be able to level up your keys to the highest possible. Now, they've done a number of nerfs to Augmentation Evoker thus far, but we're still seeing it really heavily represented in a Keystone environment.
Yeah, I think you're gonna. I'm telling you, man. Outside of Raging Weeks, I think in a month to 2 months, I think you're going to see Aug Evokers very, very rarely on this list.
And that's only going to continue
I'll
as we
fucking
get
say
pushing into higher level M+. Now that we're over
It's
a
just,
month
it is a massive damage loss.
into the patch, this is the point in the
Eventually
season
that
where
will
everyone's
matter.
going to start kind of coalescing and finding out what the path to least resistance is, finding out which of the specs is going to make sure they have the easiest time possible to clear through it. We've done some meta spotlights and everything in the past. Prop Pally and Vengeance Demon Hunter are looking really strong. There's a good mix of healers that are doing really high keys. Aug is still...
I think the problem is their supports. I don't think the damage is the stop. Bro, at some point it is. Like, there's no way to avoid this. The best players always find out a way to live. And once you're getting into 30s, which people are getting into now, timers become problems at certain key levels. It depends on the key level. Like, on a Taldazar, it might be a 32. On a Rise, it might be a 29, you know? Eventually, you are bricked by the timer without having to try to do crazy things. And the choice will be, do we do these crazy pulls that seem impossible, or do we just drop the Aug and live without the Aug? Here's the thing. Here's why I think it'll happen. If your comp in a season was like Enhanced Shaman, Moonkin, like some real squishy shit, I could see that. But the comp you would bring right now is some combination, if you were not playing Aug Evoker. It might be Moonkin, but it's most likely a combination of Rogue, Demon Hunter, Mages, and Warlocks. What do you guys think all of those 4 classes have in common? They're built like fucking houses. They are unkillable. Those classes are not going to be the thing holding you back in a hierarchy. They're unkillable as fuck, right? So it basically just becomes, does your healer live at that point, right? So like saying you can drop Aug, like how do you do it? Like they have really good stops, but that comp has really good stops too. So especially with the Vengeance DH. So saying like, oh, you can't drop Aug is such like, I can tell you there are not high-end groups that are saying this. Like I promise you they will find a way to drop Aug.
Super high up.
Unless they like buff Aug's damage. But Aug's damage is fucking piss in dungeons.
Demonology, even Fire Mage look to be on the rise. Havoc Demon Hunter is insane. And we don't really have any other class changes or even any other hints of class changes kind of coming around the corner. And so this might be the area where people get the pressure to re-roll, people get the pressure to be mixing things up a little bit more, and that is where it trickles down into lower groups as a result of finding
what a horrible mechanic
that path of least resistance. But how do we get out of that area where you're always trying to build this perfect meta composition and the argument of, well, there's always a best comp and you can't stop people from wanting to chase the meta? Well, in an ideal world, you might get a Dragonflight Season 1 where the spec balance is so good.
You can stop people from chasing the meta though by just having more classes be good. Like it's not okay. Yes, there's like perceived metas after MDIs and TGPs. Like the group finder is a little bit more locked down because what people just saw over the weekend. Like that is true. That's happened for years and years and years. I think it happens earlier in the season than the TGP now because people would just pay more attention to that kind of stuff. But like, it's not just we're only going to invite this comp. Like if there are multiple good classes, the community has shown you like season 1 Dragonflight, season 2 Dragonflight before 10.1.5, like people will bring and invite all of those classes. They do well enough when they are invited and you see them, right? Like I don't think it's like, oh, there is always going to be a god comp or thing that people invite. Like no, the reason that 10.1.5 was like that was because those classes were actually way too fucking good, right? And then they changed that and now it's a lot different. So
that people are able to build a variety of different group compositions based on their needs, but also there's a number of areas of the game that could actually have good homogenization. And I know whenever that word gets used, it's always that visceral response of like, don't homogenize anything. And I understand.
Oh, but that's something that's interesting though. The Aug, we can get into his homogenization take in a second, but that isn't going to be true for a lot of people that are like watching this stream. Like if you are someone who's like doing 25s through 27s, maybe you're not doing like really, really top, like level 30 keys with like a dedicated group and comms and stuff. Those are the groups where it's all about, WoW is all about problem solving. And the dropping Aug thing is a solution to the problem of the timer is too tight and we need more damage, right? And the problem that Aug usually solves is helps you live. Well, can we solve the living thing without needing an Aug? The answer that I can promise you is yes. You just absolutely can with what classes are good right now. But the thing is when you're pugging a 26 and 27, you might be playing with Augs for the rest of the patch because when you're doing a 26 or 27, you are not fighting the timer, except for maybe Rise and you don't have a lot of damage. You're not fighting the timer. You are fighting being alive, and Augs are objectively better at keeping the group alive than pretty much any other class. So like you will probably still play with Augs. I'm talking like very, very, very high, and I think you can play without them too, but like very, very high level problem solving, high level keys. Aug is going to look more and more like, let's get this class the fuck out of here, except for Raging, which again, it really needs to be pointed out that there's only one class in the game that can AoE soothe. and raging exists. Makes literally no sense.
Paladin did get a battle res in Dragonflight, and I don't think it really did much to ruin the experience of other specs in the game that had battle res. I also think that if they went as far as giving other...
What is it? Horseboy Heroic is in the group finder. Someone's pugging Heroic using your name right now. I respect that. Firerack, Horseboy Run, AOTC only. That is actually just someone else. That's fine. I'm going to sign up. Maybe he'll invite me. Then it'll be true. Let's go. This is my run. Hey, man. I was told to put it. Yeah, I respect the hustle. 1 second. My bird got out. All right, back to the video.
Their specs battle res, or even making it role based, like giving it to all healers, maybe making it role based to give lust to certain damage dealers, maybe melee damage dealers, having less dispels or less differing dispels that would have such massive requirements, or maybe changing all mandatory dispels into magical effects and having diseases, poisons,
what is he cooking right now?
Be nice little extras. I think the way Waycrest does their curses is actually quite good, but the way poisons exist or diseases exist in Dark Heart Thicket, and yes, they do at the end of the dungeon, those are all mandatory dispels. Otherwise, somebody's gonna die or, you know, get very, very close to it.
Are dispels weird and bad this season? I feel like... So Blizzard, I feel like, did an underrated change. And the reason it was underrated is because priests felt like they were over-nerfed. Shadow Priests, for example. And they were over-nerfed. But like them making Mass Dispel a 2-minute cooldown was one of the best decisions they've made in a long time. For a few reasons. Number one, it means it isn't the de facto solution to like multiple affixes and pulls in dungeons to where you need a priest. It allows them to do more debuff related things without Mass Dispel. Because Mass Dispel is just simply too strong. 45 seconds or whatever cooldown it was, 30. To be doing it that frequently. And it helps priests because while priests want to be viable, that's great. What priests don't want is to be pressing mass. No healer spec or DPS spec of priest wants to be pressing Mass Dispel on cooldown. Like, it's just annoying. Definitely shout out them for that change, for sure.
Do it without a major defense. Those are examples of a bad Dispel profile that you have to deal with. And I think being able to add a measured level of homogenization to the things that provide lots of friction to the dungeons is actually insanely important. If you don't have a disease dispel for your tank at the end of Dark Heart Thicket, where they get a massive healing reduction that must be dispelled, your tank will just die. The poisoners in Dark Heart Thicket will have massive ticking damage, and the players will explode whenever the debuff expires if it's not dispelled.
Need some poison, boys.
Really, really punishing for not having the poison dispel. We even saw it at the start of the expansion with Algathar Academy on the tree boss, where the...
Anyone else miss this dungeon?
Stacking poison.
What a dungeon. I hope this comes back in the next season.
Poisons would eventually get to a point
this dungeon
where they would kill you off your tank, and not having the poison.
I think this is my favorite Dragonflight dungeon.
To the beginning of the dungeon.
I think I'd rather do Algathar than every other dungeon.
That don't actually ruin people's gameplay experience, but they sort of just exist to push you to invite other classes.
Brackenhide also is awesome, yeah.
Other specializations within your class as a result. I think that the game, and M+ in particular, would actually work well for this. And there is precedence to a lot of this where how raid buffs used to work back in the day. You used to be able to have a lot of overlap with classes bringing the same raid buffs. You would have, I believe it was like Druid and Paladin bringing
something
like
needs to be
Blessing
done
of
with
Kings,
raid
Mark of
buffs,
the
I
Wild,
think.
and they were doing the same buff. You would have, I think, Shaman and Priest would both bring stamina to the raid. Hunter would notably have their pets, and they'd have a whole host of pets that could fill in buffs for the group to be able to change around
the game desperately, if you don't care about theme or whatever, you're just like, the game desperately needs shit like that.
Composition were. Those things did a really, really good job of reducing friction in the group and allowing you to welcome more people into your group just based off their personality or their gameplay or whatever that isn't directly related to their class identity. And as a result, I think provides a lot more enjoyable of a gameplay experience. I don't think everybody should have Warlock Gateway. I don't think everybody should have speed boosts. I don't think everybody should be having those kind of abilities that are very active.
No one's going to argue against that.
In your gameplay. But I think the specs that just bring a buff and you're just bringing them to bring a buff to the table don't really add a lot to the equation. And then there's the question of...
Y'all ever heard Jack talk about his Crockpot?
Well, is this going to bring back like triple rogue compositions like we saw in BFA, or is it going to bring like all the warlocks we saw in MOP that get crazy stacked or something?
He fucking loves that thing.
Because we're not.
Or maybe it's an air fryer. I don't know what it is.
Let's say a druid like in the latest Race to World.
I don't know. I don't know if it was like Crockpot or air fryer or something, but that guy at TwitchCon last year, not this year's, but last year's one, he like like held my shoulders and looked at me in my eyes, and like for 10 straight minutes he just told me about how much he loved his Crockpot.
First and a Mirror just so we can have Mark of the Wild. Maybe, but also
like,
I don't
damn,
think
bro.
that we should be worrying about what the Race to World First teams are doing as a sign of overall balance. Or also, they should be looking to balance the game in a position where you do want to be bringing everything to the table.
I mean, I feel like what we brought this tier was an indication of bad balance. Like, we brought raid buffs, and then we brought 2 of all of the classes that were definitely way too good. BM Hunters, way too good. Rogues, way too good. Demon Hunters, way too good. Enhanced Shamans. Enhanced Shaman was kind of, like, on the edge, but, like, ended up running another one of those. Like, all the classes that we brought were nerfed multiple times and are still really good. So, I mean, we were definitely exploiting not good balance. Like, but, I mean, that's just the rework thing, man. It's so weird. Current WoW is so weird because, like, a new patch comes out and just all of the classes that were reworked in that patch are just fucking insane. It's happened for so many times. I guess the only one that wasn't really like that was like Ret. Ret wasn't insane, but it was like a lot better. But the rest of them have been like game-breakingly good.
As they have made specific mechanics where priests are mind-controlling random dudes to jump them off platforms, why aren't they actually in a position where they're making mechanics that are requiring certain classes or specializations? Oh wait, they did. Farak literally put magic debuffs on the entire raid, which required a revival, and nothing else was going to work unless you had the...
Yeah, I don't like that though. I don't know. Like, I've asked them this in interviews before. They're okay on end bosses incentivizing certain specs and classes, and they don't do it a lot. Like, how many end bosses have they like required things? So they required 2 evokers on Razageth. They required 1 Mistweaver on Fireak. They required 2 Warlocks on Gahoon. They required Moonkins for chains. Nah, you could do chains without. I mean, you brought 1 usually for your raid buff, but you didn't need like 4 Moonkins. Rogues on KJ. You didn't need rogues on KJ either. They wasn't to the level of those things. We're talking about like literally required by strat, yeah. Gahoon was 2 min for most used. Yeah, I know what Gahoon was, but I said 2 for a reason. You only needed 2, yeah. Like Blizzard didn't require you to bring 4. That's not true. It was 2. Immunities on N'Zoth. Oh, very good point. But I mean, like, the thing is like you didn't need any more immunities on N'Zoth than you already brought to your comp via raid buffs and like popular classes, though. You didn't need to like class stack them. They were just there. On Argus, you needed to stack them. Yeah, you needed it, which was so funny. I'm not... Okay, this is about to go on a huge tangent, so I'm not going to do it, but it was really funny that, like, after Tomb of Sargeras, Blizzard was like, all right, we're doing the immunities are too important bit again. We're going to make immunities not do anything. And then they didn't make them do anything for all of Antorus, except for Varimathras, which was, like, a mistake. They didn't work. They intentionally didn't work, but they did for Hunters for some reason. And then, like... For the entire raid, immunities didn't do anything and they didn't save you. And then on the last phase of the last boss, they were like the most important thing in the world. It was so funny.
Entire raid go dwarf and save their dwarf abilities for that specific moment in time. So there's already precedence there.
Locks on Denathrius?
If Race to World First...
I mean, you needed 1 lock on Mythic Denathrius, but you need 1 lock all the time. Lock is a required raid buff, right? It brings you Hellstones, wipe recovery. Like, there ain't people killing Mythic end bosses without Warlocks in their main raid comp. I mean, it's right. So like, anytime there's 1 required, it's not surprising, and it's not something to talk about on a Mythic end boss. It's more like multiple or like specific specs that you wouldn't otherwise need.
Or some turbo high M plus type of setup that is totally unrealistic for the rest of the game community happens. It happens. And that shouldn't be a problem for the other 99% of players. I think there's way too much stress for the common individual getting into an M plus environment or even getting into a raid environment where you need to check off all these buffs regardless of the performance of that player, and that you're shoehorned into bringing classes just for the sake of the buffs that they bring to everybody else. And it's actually just not a positive thing. They continue to be able to add it on into the raid as you see all of these different specs that are added for this kind of poison that the rogue's bringing, the Hunter's Mark, the Wind Fury Totem, and then specs like Ellie Shaman who just don't bring any buff or just never brought, right?
Yeah, the Ellie Shaman thing is so fun. Like, since the end of Shadowlands all the way through here, so the beta of Dragonflight, end of Shadowlands, all the way through now, they have basically, we had 7 required raid spots to raid buffs, and now throughout a full expansion, they have basically added double that, and we are... Wait, let's actually do the math again. I have a spreadsheet that shows exactly what I'm trying to talk about here. It's going to take me a second to find it because I haven't opened it since before the race world first, and we have an absolute armada of spreadsheets during the race, but I'm pretty sure it's like an untitled spreadsheet. Like, Well, this was Dratnos's Race to World First raid comp prediction from my video, which he did end up fixing it. I'm going to make this a little less bright. He did end up fixing at some point, but this was like his original prediction. So let's just actually talk about the classes you need in a raid. So let's forget like let's forget tank. Let's tank and healer, not relevant. Damage is not relevant. Purely numbers. Okay. All right. So what do you need in a raid? Like what is required in a raid? It's like DH buff. It's monk buff. It's priest buff. It's mage, priest, warlock. Yeah, mage, warlock. Druid, rogue, warrior, enhance, you could say. Enhance is not literally, it's not a like a required raid buff, but it usually gives enough damage to the melee you're already bringing, also due to raid buffs, that it ends up warranting enough. Like enhance would have to be bottom fragging to not be good enough, and it also brings really good utility. I usually put DK here. DK players hate this because they don't have a all the time raid buff like warriors and rogues and druids and stuff like that. But in my opinion, they're here for one reason. You need grips and multiple fights a raid. And because of that, you need your DK to be geared for those fights. So you end up running them in your raid comp, and you've run them for like the last million end bosses because you need grips on them, or the second to last boss. So they always end up getting played for that reason. You as a DK might not like that because you're like, I wish we had something else. But like that doesn't take away from the fact that you are brought for that exact reason. Like imagine doing Mythic Fire Act right now without grips. Like ain't no fucking way. Ain't no way, right? You always bring them. You've been brought to so many end bosses in a row. Just know that that's how that is. Okay, what else do we got? I think we're nearing the like... Oh, sorry, 2 Paladins. Funny enough, I've been saying that 2 Paladin was BIS for this whole expansion because of Red Aura existing. That was turbo not true until halfway through this raid. So Red Aura was the most fake raid buff of all time. If you ever looked at your uptime on it, it was insanely bad, and you had to do very degen things to get it. Halfway through this raid, they fixed it. Now you basically have 100% uptime on Red Aura, and it is like you cannot not have this buff in the raid. It's very, very insane. So both of these are required at all times. And Hunters too. I would argue Hunter. So you could argue that like Hunter isn't needed. Like there's certain bosses where like the damage you do in P1 doesn't translate to boss damage at the end of the fight. Actually, Fire Act is one of them. Razageth is technically one of them, but the thing is it's still something you'd always want in progression. There's usually really, really good turtles. They're not super squishy anymore. They're frequently good damage dealers. But more importantly, a lot of the times where P1 doesn't transfer to the rest of the fight, the P1 is really hard, and having extra damage during specifically that phase is really helpful. Like, for example, Razageth, having 5% extra damage for almost all of P1 of Razageth would have been fucking incredible. Like, you would have not missed the DPS check, at least in progression week 1. You would have not missed the DPS check, like, so much more. You would have had so much better progression. Not to mention you can, like, use this on ads that spawn and stuff like that. It's very worth it. So, Hunter's good, for sure. I would argue Hunters are still squishy. Hunters are squishy against rot damage compared to like the really, really strong ones, but they are not squishy against big raid AoEs. Like they have a lot of buttons to live the whole raid taking a lot of damage at one point, but like they're not one of the top tier classes for living like a really hard hitting dot for 15 seconds. So yeah, but there are classes squishier than Hunter. I would not say Hunter, like in a raid environment, Hunters are not usually very squishy. They're squishy at certain mechanics. They're not in the tier of tankiness that like mages and rogues and ret paladins and demon hunters are at, and windwalkers are at, right? But they are warlocks are at, but they're not in the lower tier either. They're like an average tankiness class. You're not afraid of hunters living on fights, good ones at least. You're wrong about enhance. They are not required. Yeah, they are. If enhance has Wind Fury, you will use one of these in every single raid comp on basically every boss for the history of WoW after this. Yeah. Okay. So that's basically it, except we missed one main thing that you need an evoker. Technically, that's not true, but like I think they bring enough sauce. Like they have a 1 hour raid buff, but that 1 hour raid buff isn't very strong. It's the other stuff they bring. And then now, because Aug exists, basically this just means 2 Augs. So as long as you can stack 2 Ebon Mites on the same player, and at highest levels of optimization, you can have your Aug Evokers buffing in every single Ebon Mite window. Let's just say they're 30 seconds apart every time. Like every 30 seconds is a different window. I know it's not exactly that time, but for the sake of argument, in a lower ranked guild, you're usually auging your best players. And in that scenario, that's pretty good. But what you can do at the highest level is every single 30-second window, every ad spawn, whatever, every set of roots, you can make sure you are buffing exactly the 4 people in your raid that are doing the most damage at that point, which is not always the same 4 people. And that makes them bis for the rest of eternity. They are insanely OP. You will always bring 2 of these to your raid unless they change the way that Aug works, if you care about being optimal. So then you have 5 raid spots. And then if you actually apply this to like what a normal raid comp looks like, I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so this is like historically what has been run in this expansion, but like if you were to apply this, so you almost always bring a Havoc. You very rarely bring Vengeance DHs to Rage. Havoc would have to be really bad. Havoc is normally very, very good. They have a really good talent. Like Havoc is always going to be great for Raid because their talent tree allows them to do single target and AoE at the same time. Really, it's that simple. They would have to be very undertuned to not be brought in. Even then, they always overperform sims and dummy tests compared to other classes because they don't lose as much damage from boss movement and stuff like range do. Really good uptime class. You always need a monk. Historically, this has been brought by tank, but recently it's been brought by Mistweaver. So I don't really know where you'd put this, but let's just go ahead and put it in tank. This is historically, not just for this last raid. You need a priest. You bring it. Priest healer is a staple. You always bring one of these. Shadow is too hit or miss to like really rely on. So most guilds have like a priest healer, and it's very rare that both specs of priest would be bad. And usually one of them is super OP. Mage is obvious. You always bring a mage. You always bring a warlock. Druid is really interesting. It can be a lot of different things, but I would say more often than not, it's a druid. You get a warrior for DPS. You get an enhanced because you already have so many melee. Right. Usually bring a DK DPS on almost all raids. 90 paladins. Usually Holy Paladin is a staple because they're the only spec of Paladin that can like turn their aura into a raid cooldown. And then you've been playing Paladin a lot recently as tank. Ret, main problem with Ret in a raid is that it requires talent changes to swap between AoE and single target. And even in the class's core design, you literally have to choose between pressing Divine Storm or Templar's Verdict for your finisher. And that the other melee just simply don't have to do that. They're just kind of doing both at the same time. Unfortunate for them. So usually don't bring a Ret. So you probably, if you need 2 paladins, it'll probably be Prot and Holy for this foreseeable future. And unless Ret is very, very overtuned for a patch, damage wise, and one of these 2 is really bad. But that's most likely what's gonna be. You're gonna bring a Hunter because it's ranged. You're gonna bring 2 Aug because why not? You end up bringing a Druid here. You could bring the Druid other places. You bring a Rogue, obviously. Okay, and then this is what your raid comp usually, if you break it down the way it usually looks like, this is how it goes. And then each guild like kind of has like different preferences in healer. Like a lot of times you bring like a second priest. That's really common, right? Not super all the time, but like is usually really good. This tier you brought a monk, but you know, whatever. But this is basically how many spots you have to work with after that. It's like double priest paladin, or it's like this one is like paladin / priest, historically at least. And then this last spot is like whatever's good at the time. We in Aberys were like, okay, this is the best druid buff, so we'll do that here so we can bring more devastation evokers, you know, stuff like that. But this is actually what you're doing. And then it's like, okay, what's the best melee? Demon Hunter? Okay, whatever. Now Demon Hunter, let's just say this second Demon Hunter spot is not really a Demon Hunter. It's like whatever the best melee is, you're just going to bring 2 of them. And then this is like whatever the best range is, you're going to bring 1 or 2 of those. And sometimes like this tier, it'll be melee. And then like that's your raid comp. It's no more complicated than that. There's like almost no decisions to make because of the raid buff thing. So this is all coming back to like what Jack is saying, like how do they fix this? Like raid buffs makes your raid comp look basically like this for the foreseeable future. This will just always be something like this. It'll minorly change based on if certain specs are insane. And then the funniest thing is you saw me never mention Ellie Shaman because how could you? They're just the only class in the game that could if Resto Shaman was the best healer, you would play Resto Shaman in that 4th spot, but you would never play an Ellie Shaman unless they had a buff
that exist to the end of time, and I think that reducing a lot of that actually is a positive side of the game. And whether they have hero talents, which are adding some interesting utility to specs, or whether they're using it to just add extra damage, I think that
I like that idea, by the way. I love that idea. I love the idea of Spirit Walker's Grace being party wide. I think that's a sick idea. You wouldn't require like 2 of them, but it would just be sick for like a ranged group to have that, or like the ranged that are the least fucked by movement. Because a lot of people are like, oh, you would just give it to all ranged. But the thing is most ranged can move and do damage just fine. And there's some that like cannot do anything when they're moving. Like for example, Mistweaver, when they're doing their ramp stuff, does not want to be moving. Certain Warlock specs are like very immobile, stuff like that. But then like that's not true of all ranged. Like even a lot of mage specs can do decent, like Shimmer's insane, you know, like mages don't really need to be in that group. It's like you wouldn't need more than 5 people who need that buff. So like party wide, that would be like, I think the leader of my guesses of like how they could add a cool thing. It would actually be party wide casting with that, just like Aspect of the Fox.
Those are always going to be good areas to see. Holy Priest getting Symbol of Hope back in, or Symbol of Hope buffed, I should say, back in Shadowlands actually was a positive thing because it added some utility to the spec that didn't really have it otherwise in a raiding environment. It got to a point where it was a little bit too insane, but then you also have like Mistweaver and Resto Druid, where they're not really bringing that raid-wide damage reduction or raid-wide utility that other healer specs are bringing, and as a result, they're getting pushed down in representation for the race to world first, except, of course, like we've seen out of Amirjasil, where, you know, Mistweaver just had a mechanic basically designed for it that brought it to the table.
You would have played a Mistweaver this raid if there wasn't even a single magic debuff on Fire Act. That class is ridiculously OP in raids.
In addition to it being just the highest output healer.
Yeah, I mean, it was
environment
fucking
as well.
insane.
So some of those little details aside, overall, I think the War Within is a tremendous opportunity to try it out. So too is Fated, because we do have a Fated season coming up to cap off Dragonflight.
Dude, so now that I've been saying that the new expansion is called World of Warcraft War of the Worlds for so many, like just as like a bit, it actually like when people start saying the name of the expansion correctly as the War Within, I'm like, oh, that's weird. They said the War Within.
And if we had radical ideas going on for loot, why not start having some radical ideas going on for how specs are going to be represented, how you're able to maybe get bloodlust items that can be used that are miles better than the garbage that you have to deal with.
Dude, drums are horrible. I cannot believe that drums are as bad as they are. Drums used to be 5% worse than Lust, and the reason they nerfed it is because they wanted Lust to be more impactful. So they gave a new class Lust. So they're like, let's make sure you get a Lust. I think it's okay to incentivize getting an actual Lust. So like, I'm okay, for example, I don't think drums should also be the same thing as Lust. Like, I think Lust should have impact, but I just don't think it should be nearly as much as it is. Like, it should be way closer than it is. Like drums is like almost a complete afterthought. It's so bad.
As an engineering item, why not use the opportunity in that season to try radical things to reduce friction in forming M+ groups, that reduce friction in forming raid teams, and allow players to just log on, play with their buddies, and blast. Let me know what you guys think. If you enjoy these type of videos, this sort of speculation for the future.
All right, it told me to subscribe. I'm doing it. Am I subbed? I am subbed. Did I ring the bell? Nah, I don't ring the bell on any... What does ringing the bell on anyone's YouTube channel do? It blows up your phone? Oh my god, that's fucking horrible. No one should do that. If you guys are notified to my YouTube channel, turn that off fucking immediately.